Hi, and welcome, and thank you for joining us today. Today is the Executive Espresso Break, the caffeinated edge for scaling success. You know, Steve and I have worked a long time scaling businesses, and we know that scaling business can be one of the most rewarding challenges a leader can face, but it requires more than ambition. It demands alignment across our topics today: people, processes, and technology. People, processes, and technology. What could go wrong?
Eh,
Today, we'll focus on four critical areas therein where we see leaders often facing hurdles, and will explore strategies to overcome them. So, the session today isn't about theory, it's about sharing real world strategies that are tactical and actionable. Each of the focus areas that we're going to discuss today is designed to help you pinpoint opportunities, overcome challenges, and leave with some clear steps that you can implement immediately, right after this webinar. So, whether you're driving sales and marketing growth, you're scaling your overall operations, or you're leading your organization towards M&A, the insights we'll share here today are tailored to help you move forward with confidence and clarity. So grab your espresso and let's get into it. Here's where we're going today. This is our agenda. You notice that we are going to talk about a couple of different things here today. We're going to talk people, process, and technology. We're going to do that over these four areas. Before we get into those four areas, though, I thought it'd be nice to find out a little bit about who are these people and how can they possibly help me? Because I know if I was sitting out there in webinar land, that's the question I'd want answered. So let me turn it over to Steve. Steve, give yourself an introduction, then I'll do a brief one as well.
Thanks, Sam. Always great to be with you. I'm Steve Litzow. I've been doing B2B sales for the past 30 years. I've been a five-time head of sales and marketing. I've had two exits. And one of the things, as you mentioned earlier, Sam, is scaling a company is what, particularly in technology, it's what growth is all about. It's the way to get to growth. And a lot of people takes a lot of effort. It is great fun, but there's a lot of challenges. And I think now, with particularly as we get into the world of AI, we're going to see it move much faster and more enjoyable. And we'll touch on those things as we go forward.
Great introduction, Steve. Hi, everybody. I'm Sam Palazzolo. I'm the managing director at Tip of the Spear Ventures, where we focus on helping leaders scale their businesses. Since leading a tech startup to a private equity exit a little over 12 years ago, I've worked with almost 1,000 leaders and their organizations to help them achieve success. What does success look like? In my ex-Deloittean mind, it looks like growing from 10 million to $1 billion beyond, and it looks like putting today's topic, people, processes, and technology, in perfect alignment. Not good alignment, but perfect alignment. So let's jump into it, Steve, and let's talk about our first topic here today. Oh, but before we do, it's time for an offer. No punches hold back here. Steve and I want to work with you, and we want to make 2025 your best year. Part of that is identifying what is the strategic direction you want to head in when it comes to scaling your organization. We're going to drop into the chat arena a little bit later on today, how it is that you can do that. But just know this much: we're here to help. This is a complimentary strategy session, and we've had numerous people take advantage of it, and they've gotten some results straight away from it. So that's going to be our offer. We'll talk more about it a little bit later on. But Steve, let's get into our first topic here. It is developing a talent pipeline. I like to share this much, that scaling isn't just about hiring. It's about developing the leaders and team members who will drive your business forward. I've seen it before. You have as well. A strong talent pipeline ensures you're ready for growth, but building that pipeline and that deep bench, it takes some foresight and some strategy. So the two questions that we have today, we'll start off with the first one, are aimed at answering: how can leaders identify and prepare the right people for the right roles at the right time? The right people for the right roles at the right time. So here's question number one when it comes to aligning talent and growth goals. How can leaders align their talent pipeline with their future growth strategy, Steve?
Great question. And hiring is such an important thing that people put to the side all the time. And so I think the couple things that I want to get across first is you should always be recruiting, ABR, meaning you should constantly, as a leader, regardless of your function, you should always be networking. You should be looking for people who can fill roles, and not just the roles you have today, but the roles that you're going to have tomorrow. And I think that's the key. So you're constantly, and people, somebody will quit or they'll get an open headcount and all of a sudden they'll start hiring. You should have a bench of people that you are in contact with, that you have, they may have a job, you may not have an opening, but you know that they've got the skill set, the experience, and the outlook that you're looking for. And so I think that's the first piece. And then the second thing is you should, from a sales point of view, is to architect out what your revenue looks like over the next 18 to 24 months. Where do you think it's coming from? What's that go to market strategy? How is that revenue coming in? What type of companies, what type of partners? What's that ecosystem? And look out over the next 24 months because it's going to change and it will change as you grow. And so sitting down and developing that map and that plan on, oh, I think we're going to start moving more into enterprise sales, for example, right? Okay, what does that look like? What do those companies look like? Then you sit there and divine, okay, what's that skill set that you're going to need, for example, enterprise selling? What do you currently have now? Who's in that position? Is it a new position? And then sit down and look at over time, okay, I'm going to start doing this in 6 months, is when you then should start looking and recruiting, right? And again, always be recruiting, right? And the second piece here is take a look, take a moment, doesn't take 20 minutes, half hour, and look at where do you think your revenue's coming in the next 24 months, and what skills do you not currently have?
It always ceases to amaze me, Steve, how it is that we get to this time of year. We're in fourth quarter 2024. It's the holiday season. It's upon us. And typically, we'll have leaders that'll share with us that it's slow from mid November through probably the first full week of January of the following year. And if we know that's the case, why aren't we doing something about it? I guess my old mentor used to share with me that excuses don't produce results. And so when it comes to aligning talent with growth goals, if we know that we typically have challenges here in this part of Q4 and we want to round out the year with success, we probably need to lean into it. And a lot of that happens with, do we have talent and enough talent to support the goals that we've established? So not only in the current, that's a good short-term vision for this quarter, but what Steve mentioned, if you can look out a year and a half, 2 years down the road and strategically attempt to identify where is it that we're going to need some personnel needs that are going to be customer facing or support oriented, those are the strategic personnel moves that we're talking about here in aligning talent and growth goals. Steve, let's talk about the second question, and that's preparing leaders for complexity. What strategies prepare high potential employees or next generation leaders to step into leadership during rapid growth moments?
I think there's a couple of things that I have done in the past. The first is getting a coach. This is, you look at all the great sports guys, Tom Brady, for example, Tiger Woods, these guys, top world class athletes, they've got teams around them, they've got coaches around them to help them continue to be good and to do better. And one of the, I think, a big overlooked thing, particularly in that secondary level of the directors, and that is getting those people executive coaches. It is probably the most cost effective and best way to help a new manager, a new leader get up to speed quickly. So I think that is a huge thing that we overlook a lot. And I think it's a great use of time and money for people. And then I think the second thing is executive sponsorship. right? So teaming up new, younger leaders with experienced leaders and setting up a formal program where they're meeting. A lot of companies have mentor programs that some work and some don't work, but literally setting up where you're putting together a rhythm of business, you're meeting with these people. It can be as much as every couple of weeks you're having coffee or lunch, but literally pairing up people with senior experienced leaders and the new leaders so there's a hands-on way in which they can start learning and figuring out and asking the stupid questions, if you will, in private.
It's a great point, Steve. Yeah, I'll take it a step further. I believe in the executive coaching model. Obviously, I've done that for 15 years plus. What you're talking about, having mentors who are on staff in a leadership position who can take others or high potential leaders under their wing and provide them with some additional perspective that's not necessarily on the clock or in those one-on-one meetings with their direct superior within an org chart structure. But I'll take it a step further. If you back up to the beginning, a good leadership development program that's architected specifically for the organization that hits on not only the cultural elements that you want to put into place, but what are the key competencies that we expect our leaders today, as well as in the future, to put forward. If you structure a well-developed leadership development program, and then you bolt on executive coaching, and then as Steve said, you bolt on a great mentoring relationship, that is a trifecta made in heaven. It's the perfect storm when it comes to people and escalating them towards success. And especially if you think about what it is that we're interested when it comes to scaling the business. Scaling a business requires personnel at all levels to be on top of their A game. And so these are two important points here, Steve. Uh, let's
Great point.
slide
Yep.
over to our next topic here, which is process optimization. You and I have seen this also. When we scale businesses, uh, it exposes inefficiencies in your workflows. Think of it as a dramatic lowering the water table. We're going to see where those tree stumps are in the lake as well as the rocks. Uh, Processes that worked well when your team was smaller or your volume was lower often can't keep up as the business grows. The challenge, we think, is in identifying bottlenecks and redesigning processes so that you can scale efficiently while maintaining quality. Scale efficiently while maintaining quality. Let's take a look at two questions here. We'll tackle the first one when it comes to exploring some strategies to tackle this process optimization challenge head on. The first question, Steve, deals with identifying the all important bottlenecks or roadblocks. From your perspective, what's the most effective way to identify hidden bottlenecks that stall growth?
It's really, to me, it's coming down to key metrics, particularly in the sales funnel, which is things like time between stages, deal velocity by segment, resource utilization, quote to close ratios, sales cycle durations. And in sale, time kills all deals. And so the easiest way to find the bottlenecks is to find out what's taken so much time. And so setting up those key KPIs, watching them on a regular basis and understanding what that time cycle is between stages, between actions, that's where you're going to find the bottlenecks. And what's interesting with CRM, with the new AI and CRMs, particularly people like Salesforce has got some really good stuff coming out, as does HubSpot. They're starting to you can put there's AI tools in there that allow you to start looking at the time and their time stamping. And it's really, I think that is the number one way to figure out what's stopping, what's holding up the
Yeah,
process.
no, I think you're right on. From a where is our bandwidth being deployed? We only have so many hours in a day.
Yep.
And really, it's about measuring effectiveness. But when it comes to these hidden bottlenecks, KPIs and metrics, they can be really great. One of the organizations that we work with, They are a data centric company. But the old saying, garbage in equals garbage out, has never been more true for them. The KPIs and the metrics that they collect, there's a lot of times self-reported. So what Steve is referring to, and Salesforce is a great example from a CRM perspective and beyond, that can help identify really the stages of a sales cycle, but more importantly, where it is that your reps are spending time and what exactly are they doing? And is that time well spent? Those are the things that a leader needs to look at and identify. It requires a real quick feedback loop also. A lot of those types of things are built into most software packages, but it takes the A word, accountability, for leaders to go in and to measure and view those measurements and then manage accordingly. So let's talk about question two here, Steve. And comes to this is a question that's focused on reducing complexity. How do you simplify workflows without sacrificing effectiveness?
Yeah, this is a great thing because I was actually just working with a client yesterday on the process, and we were joking that it's so easy to make any process, particularly a sales process, complicated. That comes so easily, and so you have to your point earlier, you have to be super diligent about how do you keep it simple, right? You can put in so many different steps and try to capture everything, but one, making sure you write it down. And as you write it down, looking at those places to where do I not need another step in there? Where do I not need another thing? Approval process is a great place to start. How do you simplify that? How do you basically do it based off of deal size versus every single deal needs 6 different approvals, right? How do you create self-service options? How do you put together a again, going back to AI, how do you put in automated steps that will automatically score the leads, right? Taking out steps. So for me, it's being aware of keeping it simple. If it's not written down, it's not a process. So as you write it down and you walk through the steps, where can you take out steps, right? How do being very brutal with what needs to actually get done and what's really going to move a deal from a lead to an actually closed one.
You're right on, Steve. I can share this much, and you and I, we've had several sidebar cocktail conversations over this. There is a simplification kind of guru edict that's currently out there that's taking place. Everybody is encouraging, if you're in a guru stance, that you should simplify your business. Look, here's what I do. It's so simple. But I'll give you a great example. One of the gurus that I met probably over a decade ago, he is a simplification advocate for a 4-hour work week. I think you know who I'm talking about.
Yep.
But here's the reality of it. He works like a crazy person. And from a complexity perspective, he has contingency planned out every potential interaction. So maybe rather than simplification, we can think of this as organization, organizational effectiveness. The better organized you are, the simpler your world seems to come. It's almost like the harder I work, the luckier I get. So
Yes.
the more organized you are, guess what? The more simple life becomes. But you've got to have the foresight to lay out the strategic direction. And that's really what we're talking about here. It's funny though, right? Let's move on here to the next one because we've hinted on this, but let's see if we can't peel the onion back further, take a little deeper dive when it comes to automating repetitive tasks. Because we know as businesses grow, the weight of repetitive manual tasks becomes a serious drag on productivity. Think of it as one of those dragsters that's at Mile High National that's going to go down and it's going to go from 0 to a couple hundred miles per hour in a couple seconds. And all of a sudden the parachute comes out because if not, that dragster would probably end up in Kansas because it'll allow it to stop. And what we're talking about here is automation. And specifically, automation, one of the fastest ways to regain time and energy, and it'll allow you and your team to focus on higher value work. But how do you decide what to automate and how do you implement it without disrupting the overall business? So, question number one here deals with prioritizing automation opportunities. So, Steve, the question that we came up with, what's the best way to decide which tasks to automate first?
Huh. Always, that's a great question because there's so much you can do. There's 1,000 different ways to do it. I think for me, what I've done is do a simple chart, right? Where you have what impact versus effort. And I think you start with those tasks that have high impact, low effort, proposal generating, meeting scheduling, right? Where pretty simple to do, but a huge impact on it. Getting to things like complex customization, that's going to take a big effort, may not have as big of impact. So sitting down, looking at your process, looking at your steps and figuring out, okay, where can I find, you can find tools for everything. Where's going to be the biggest impact with the least amount of effort to get started? Because the trick here is getting started. You can overanalyze this, you can overthink this, is literally pick one thing and get started. And at the end of the day, keep it simple. I'm a big fan of crawl, walk, run. Do something, try it out, do something, keep moving. But sitting around and overanalyzing it, you know your business. If you've been running this business, you know it well enough. You can say, oh, great, we're going to start with meeting scheduling. We're going to start with lead generation. I think keeping it simple and straightforward and get started.
I think that's solid advice. It's the simplification rule, but brought
Right.
to automating repetitive tasks. I'll share kind of the science behind it, and then I'll share an art moment. The science behind it, you and I, we analyze a business when we begin to work with them across five key pillars, 94 different variables underneath those five key pillars. But it provides us with a quick readiness assessment that the prioritization of the tasks that we're basically going to work on, they bubble up to the surface. And just like those tasks that we're going to work on when it comes to scaling the business, when it comes to prioritizing automation opportunities, there's a common misperception that you need to work on them one at a time, chronologically. We're going to handle the first one based on the prioritization that we assign to it. It's number one, it's pole position. We should work on it. But there's a common misperception that we need to work on it before completing or going to the next prioritization number two. Sometimes you have to have the first automation opportunity in place because it feeds into the second. It's upstream of. But from my perspective, the common misperception, Steve, seems to be we need to do these one at a time. And that's very rarely the case. You can work simultaneously on these automation opportunities. That's the science part. The art part, this is a quick takeaway. One of the organizations that I worked with, they were a tech dev firm. And one of the things that they identified was that if we do the same task manually three times, we're going to automate it. It was their quick hit way,
Oh,
regardless of where
I
within
like
the
that.
organization, yeah, who, whether it was customer facing, whether it was support oriented, whether it was C suite or entry level associate. If they were doing something three times, they had a real simple little card that they filled out and they brought it over to the chief transformation officer for automation. And guess what? Things that were filled out on those cards became automated. It was a real, again, back to almost that quick feedback loop.
Yep.
It was a real quick win for the organization. Little science, a little art. It's something that you can begin implementing as soon as we're off of this webinar today. Let's talk about question number two here, because this is the balancing automation with the human touch. The human touch. So, Steve, the question we came up with, How do you automate without losing the personal connections that drive business success?
Great question. I've been talking about this for quite some time. I think there's a couple of key principles as you walk into this. I think the first is you automate processes, not relationships. So it's not how am I spending time with you, but how do I find those processes that allow me to spend time with you? Again, I think it's using automation to enhance and not replace the interaction. And it's using automation to make sure where you're adding the most value is your interaction with your customer, with your client, with your prospect. It's not necessarily in writing that email. It's not necessarily in scheduling that meeting. It's not in that. So making sure, again, going back to taking the time and putting out down on paper, where are you spending your time? And the things that is not interacting with your client, or customer, that's where you should be focusing on automation. Deal process kind of stuff, usage monitoring, automated renewal notifications. Again, stuff that has to happen, important for the business, but it's not a relationship builder. It's not a customer interaction. And that's where you start. And again, you should have your process written down. You should be reviewing it. You should be, as you're walking through it every day, realizing, oh, here, great example. And you said, put it down on a piece of paper. Oh, here's something I keep doing, but it's really not interacting with my customer in a way that is meaningful. How can I automate this? How can I delegate this? How do we do this so I have more time with my customer?
Yeah. You're spot on. How do we have more quality time with our customers? Because our customers are our customers for a reason. And that is that they genuinely either enjoy our product or service, and hopefully they enjoy the personnel or the people that they touch in utilizing that product or service. I'm working with two different AI gen companies right now who are out there and they're attempting to modify for their clients not only the sales process, but most importantly, the customer success moment. And they're looking at it from a tech play. And how is it that we can work on a chat bot that represents not only the organization and their product or service offering, but also maintain that personal touch that a client would get or a prospective client would get if they called in on the 800 number and got a hold of someone.
Right.
It's a total revamp. Think of it as how is it that our people who actually answer the phone call, what do they do and what do they say? And from a leadership perspective, it's looking at what gets captured in those interviews as is that the accurate representation of what we want? Is that the desired content from a conversation? And then it's a how do we automate that? How do we slide that over to the chat bot? And how do we free up our agents' time so that way we reduce call volume, but the call volume that does come through, client, prospective client, better educated, and they're in that go, no go decision making process. This balancing automation with the human touch, I think there's a strategic architecture that needs to be identified regarding what is it that's currently being said and done. Is that accurate for what it is that we want representing us as a business? Is this our culture shining through? And how do we automate that so that way we have a best case scenario with prospective clients and current clients as well? So those are my 2 cents from the
That's
chiefs.
great.
Let's keep sliding down here because this is where the rubber hits the road. If we talked about people, we talked about processes, let's talk a little bit about technology and enhancing IT infrastructure because the demands on IT infrastructure grow exponentially as the business scales. Systems that worked well before can quickly become bottlenecks, especially when dealing with the complexities of a larger organization. Beyond simply upgrading hardware and software, leveraging AI is becoming a game changer in the IT infrastructure space, particularly for sales and marketing teams. So let's explore how leaders can prepare their IT infrastructure to handle growth and gain a competitive edge with AI. So, questions number one's focus: AI's role in sales and marketing for 2025. Steve, how can AI driven tools reshape sales and marketing strategies for 2025?
This is a big topic. We should actually think about doing one just simply on this because it is such a huge impact. It is going to change. 2025 is going to be fascinating to see how the entire AI world is going to change what we're doing in sales and marketing these days. And I think a couple places that they're going to start. One is hyper personalization on the customer journey, right? AI's ability to process just huge amounts of information really quickly is going to give us unprecedented personalization. The second, I think, is going to be predictive analytics and decision support. Again, the ability of AI to take so much information and quickly make it digestible for market leaders is going to basically help us. The predictive analytics are going to become things that we can never imagine we could do or took forever to do before, we're going to be able to do very quickly and almost automatically. And I think the third is going to be conversational and customer engagement. We talked about not taking the relationship, but going down to more sophisticated chatbots,
Hmm.
where, as we know, 70% of the customers today, prospects, they know the market as well as we do. They've done research. By the time they reach out to vendors, they are way down the path. And so being able to, on the websites, get chatbots that can have a sophisticated conversation, answer very detailed questions, I think is going to move the conversation and move the journey further and faster. And I think that's going to be a competitive advantage. So those are my three to start with.
Yeah, it almost backs into what we were talking about during process optimization, and that is the automation moment. Yeah, the automation moment is front and present and right in front of us when it comes to AI driven tools. One of the leaders that we work with, Steve, he has famously shared that what used to take 6 weeks, they now can accomplish in 6 hours by leveraging AI. So, how can these tools reshape sales or marketing strategies? I would look at it from the perspective of, okay, if what we can accomplish in a 6 hour time frame used to take us 6 weeks, how do we blow this up even bigger? What are the tools that are out there from a tech stack potential that we could implement and execute? And what could be the benefits with the cost associated with it, obviously, but what could be the benefits that are right at hand? I think the leaders in the market are going to be those who are early adopters, who are trying different things. And I've got a key tip, but it bleeds into the second question here. So let's get into it, Steve. It's future proofing IT with AI. The question that we want to tackle: what's the most critical step leaders can take to integrate AI into their IT or organizational infrastructure?
It all starts, it all starts with data, right? By definition, that's what AI is using, large language models. So being able to make sure, and I think the first place everyone's got to start with is, what is your data foundation? Have you put together a unified data warehouse? Do you have governance policies in place? Do you want garbage, as you mentioned earlier, garbage in, garbage out? Do you have clean data? Are there established ownership and stewardships of what data are we collecting? How are we collecting? Who's responsible for it? What is the nomenclature? How does that work? I think you've got to start with a strong data foundation. And that's something everybody should be doing right now, is making sure that they understand what data they have and how it's being used. And everybody's using that same structure to move forward. And I'm going to stop right there and let you go, and I'll jump on top of that. To me, that is so critical, getting that data foundation set up.
Yeah, no doubt you and I are in perfect alignment with this one. A couple months ago, we went to a conference in Ernst& Young. A couple of partners from EY had a conversation surrounding AI and specifically strategy, not only within an IT department, but organizationally. And the statistic that they shared should have you fall out of your chair. This is it. 95% of organizations say that they should have an overarching AI strategy plan, but only 25% do. 95% say they should, but only 25% say they do. Now, we analyzed this strategically and said those 70%, we can help them. This is very similar to the things that you identified, Steve. It's almost like implementing a cyber program. What is our strategy? What are the governance policies and procedures that we want to put into place? And how are we going to upskill or train our workforce to be able to adhere to those things? 70% of the organizations out there, again, that don't have an AI strategy in place, they should. It doesn't mean that the 25% that do or have the best strategy in place from an architecture, but at least they've got something, and that's better than nothing. We also looked at it from the perspective of if 95% said that they should, what are the other 5% that take you up to the top 100? What are they thinking? Is this the moment of it's just a fad? It's like the interweb. It's just going to blow over. It's a crazy moment to think of what these EY partners and even what it is that we've done in helping organizations architect that strategic direction. So that way they become part of the 25%. But it is one of those things where it takes an overarching strategic direction, not only within the IT department, but organizationally in order for AI to not only root, but really blossom. So those are my 2 cents, Steve.
Which I think is great. As you mentioned this, I think what's happening is a lot of companies think they're too small, right? You ask that 5%, we have this 75% aren't doing it. I think they're like, oh, we're too small. It's not going to make a difference. AI today, tools out there today, everybody should be using them regardless of the size of the company because they're A, easy to use, and B, you're going to get left behind if you don't.
Yeah, I think you're right. And maybe when we trickle into the Q1 timeframe here, our next executive espresso break or one of them upcoming should have sole focus on AI because we know this much that there's probably some users out there, some power users, but they might be far and few in between. And their knowledge may not be getting transferred across the organization. One of the organizations that we work with, they implemented a chief AI officer, a CAIO. What's the role of the chief AI officer? They're basically out there to not only identify what could be a potential fit from a tech stack perspective within the organization, but how is it that we're adhering to our AI policies and procedures, that strategy that I mentioned? Are people really adhering to it? Or do we need to have some of those zero trust policies from a cyberspace put into play? But I think it's one of those things where, yeah, definitely a topic for us to further pursue
Yes.
in the upcoming quarter, because I think it's only going to get bigger and better. Pay no attention to the 5% of that EY statistic that think it's a fad and that it's going to blow over because
Yeah.
it's here and it's here to stay. So what you do organizationally to capitalize on it, this is where the leaders will set themselves apart from everybody else. Steve, those are our 4 questions, 4 up, 4 down. We're at the end of our time together. And again, this is our opportunity to share with each of you. And those of you that are watching this recording, we'll put a link into the show notes so that way you can get a hold of us. We're doing these 2025 Executive Espresso Strategy sessions. They're only 20 minutes, but they're high impact
Yep.
because what we're going to do is we're going to identify your most pressing opportunity. We'll discover and identify what are the true costs associated with them, not the tangible only, but also the opportunity cost associated as well. And then we'll share a couple of different ways that we can work together if you're interested in that. If you want to, great. If you don't, we'll provide you with the deck and your notes, and you can go off. And we're here to support Just Know as a resource driving forward. That's one of the reasons why we do this executive espresso break, right? It's not only so Steve and I can drink espresso and talk, it's our opportunity to share with you. So that's all I've got, Steve. If you want to, bring us home.
Great. Thanks, Sam. And I thought this was it's always great fun being with you. I think though, as we talked about today, what's going to happen in 2025 is going to be so exciting. so much change. The tools and processes are getting so much easier, quite frankly, to use. The advances that the technology around AI and the data use, it's going to be overwhelming unless you take that time to sit down and, as we've talked, how do you build a strategy? How do you make sure your data is in is clean and in the right place? And finally, start somewhere, right? It's everybody here and everybody listening has an opportunity to incorporate AI that's going to make their life easier and their company able to scale. And I think that's the bottom line for me. So always great fun. Look forward to next month, and we will have everybody have a great holiday season.
Yeah. Happy holidays, everybody.